Let's call the meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission to order. For those of you in the room and those of you watching at home, so if you're watching at home, just give a signal or let me know if you can hear me, if this audio is working. Okay, Ira, thank you, Ira. Ira wins the prize. Thank you very much. We're having a lot of technical problems tonight. We can't get the screen to work in here, nor can we get the recording to work. So this meeting is going to be recorded just in terms of sound, not in terms of video, unfortunately. So with that, at 7:13, we'll call the meeting to order. I'll note that all planning commissioners are present and accounted for tonight. We are joined by 3 members of the public, 1 council member by Zoom, and the borough zoning officer and the borough's planning consultant from Montgomery County Planning Commission as well tonight. I believe that is who is here with us tonight. Our agenda is brief, but it may get longer. Tonight, we have 2 main topics. One is to discuss further the memo about 230 Haverford that would be a response to the presentation we saw 2 meetings ago. Further discussion of revisions to the zoning code. And I would like to propose an amendment to the agenda to have a brief discussion of 714 Montgomery Avenue tonight. I think we should formally add that to the agenda. So all in favor of adding that to the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed to adding that? Okay, and I'll discuss that in a minute. So we'll start with the chair's update. I do not believe I have any updates to offer since our last meeting, so we'll move to approval of minutes. We did circulate minutes, I think yesterday or over the weekend at some point, and there was one request to amend the minutes. So we amended them and sent out another edition of the minutes later in the day today. So I would like to ask if anyone has any further comments or questions about the minutes as submitted by our secretary, Michael Gandhi.
Didn't get the update.
Okay. Jen, you requested the update. Would you mind sort of just letting everyone here know the corrections that you requested, which were incorporated into the draft?
I thought it was important to include a comment that I made at the meeting publicly that maintaining the parking lot as is on the south side of the storefront row, where all the cars would park, would create a heat island effect. And in part because we are moving forward with the green building ordinance, and that is along the same line of continuity with that thinking. And also because, not that I have to say why, but because the previous presentation, which I was not present for, I was not a member of Planning Commission at the time, did have a further developed parking scheme, whereas this one just defaulted back to as is.
Actually, I'd like to correct that. There was no presentation made to the Planning Commission except for in, I guess, January, February of 2019 or something?
2019,
Yeah.
2019, yeah.
And that was a totally different plan.
Yeah,
So aside from that, we haven't seen, and that's on the webpage. Aside from that, we haven't seen any proposals. So are you referring to the one that was made in 2019?
yes.
Okay. All right. And then you had another correction. What was that?
Because others were saying, oh, the 2019 one had underground parking. Like others were referring back to
But I don't
that.
think it did.
Anyway,
That plan was never submitted officially. It was floated around for discussion purposes, but it was never as,
No,
It
the
was
2019 plan was
the
submitted.
underground parking,
It was never a public proposal.
right, that's what I'm saying.
So it's neither here nor there.
It's as if it didn't happen.
Right.
but somehow it's referred to. It's alive. Its spirit is
Not
alive.
anymore.
I would prefer not to talk about things here that were not entered into public discourse. That was not entering the public discourse. So let's not talk about those things. It's not entering the public discourse. If you'd like to refer to an application that was submitted in 2019, that's fine. But we can't refer to things that aren't part of the public record. So, but you had another comment.
The other side of the comment was that we have been considering the plan for Station Circle and the plan for 230 Haverford as if they're isolated conditions. In fact, they are totally interdependent on each other for their viability, particularly in regard to the flow of vehicular traffic.
Okay, so those have been added, those comments have been added to the draft. So Michael did that right away. So are there any other comments or questions about the minutes from last month? Okay, any other superlatives to offer? Okay, so could I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended by Jennifer?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended by Jennifer? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the minutes are approved to reflect what Michael gave us and the amendments that Jennifer has requested. All right, so we'll move on to land development and subdivision. We'll talk first about 230 Avenue, and then, because we revised the agenda, we'll talk briefly about 714 Montgomery. So after our meeting last month or 2 weeks ago, I revised the draft memo that I asked you to consider to take into account the comments that people made that were recorded in the minutes. And so what I would like to do is ask if you feel these notes accurately reflect what was presented and the requests you made to amend them. The amendments, I also added a little more background at the beginning, simply by referring to our minutes, the minutes of the meeting in which Tim Rubin presented the project. I brought in some of the material from that meeting from the minutes and incorporated them here as background, just to provide context for what the proposal involves. We added a comment that Michael proposed to underscore the importance of allowing for a level of growth in Narberth consistent with Narberth's comprehensive plan. And we added a comment that Jennifer requested to affirm that we would like to see the applicant comply with the provisions of the future green building ordinance. And we removed the kind of introductory sentence which talked about the Planning Commission generally approving of the concept. The comment was it's too early to say. And so that was removed. And those two things were added. I believe that is, Adam had a comment added, I believe that had to do with exploring the furtherness possibility of converting the Little Gym building or leaving it as commercial. I believe Adam, you added that comment as well. And so I think those are the major changes in this from the time we saw it last. So hopefully that reflects what people wanted this to say, and so I guess I want to make sure it meets everyone's approval.
In skimming this, I have to apologize, I didn't really read through it. Does it discuss, the Station Circle project?
Yes, to Kathleen.
And actually having the 230 Haverford project and the Station Circle project working together because it's really part of a larger planning project.
Does anyone, I just gave my printout to Dennis and Kathleen so they could look at it, so I'm going to have to open it up to see what it says about
I
it.
can comment on that.
Well, first of all, I just want to make sure that we understand what it actually says, and then we can have comments.
I don't have it.
I mean, you mentioned it in parking and circulation. but not that we recommend it be discussed as part of the bigger planning project.
Okay, so I'll just read it and then we'll take other comments. The Planning Commission also notes that ingress to the parking from Haverford Avenue.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so someone in the universe is watching this meeting.
Now, Narberth Borough.
Okay, so we're at about 7:23, just for the record. We've been on the meeting for 10 minutes. So the 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes of this meeting have been recorded on audio, and so the remainder of the meeting, I guess, will be recorded video and audio by Zoom. Okay. All right. So anyway. Planning Commission also notes that ingress to the parking from Haverford Avenue and egress to Station Serving require crossing through busy pedestrian areas and urges that additional traffic through these points should be minimized. All right, so discussion, Jim.
Well, I know that during the development of the schematic for Station Circle, which I prefer to call Town Square, or at a minimum, Station Square, did include a meeting between Tim Rubin's group and the landscape architect, Simone Collins, to discuss the option that Simone Collins had presented that cut off egress from the parking lot. None of the rest of us were present. I don't know, Jim, were you present for that meeting?
No.
No, it was behind closed doors, I regret to say. And the outcome of it, as I understood it imperfectly, I confess, is that the idea of cutting off the egress from the parking lot was dropped. And we were left with the option that includes egress through the square. Now, the benefit of that is yet to be demonstrated. I can sort of understand the benefit, but I wasn't part of the process. I didn't observe the process, and I can only report that that's what I was told.
Were there minutes? I'm sorry.
I'm sure not.
Okay.
I'm sure not.
Is there a rationale for the
I think it was
decision?
I have no idea what the rationale was. I'm just telling you what I heard. So when we came to reviewing the schemes that Simone Collins had developed, the scheme that included terminating the egress from the parking lot was sort of swept aside. And I think I look forward to getting back involved with that. There has been no movement on that for many weeks. So, as a separate motion under new business, I'm going to suggest that we look into reactivating that design effort.
Other comments about whether the language that's in the letter right now is adequate, or whether we need to?
I mean, I thought you did a good job of kind of incorporating all of the different items that we had talked about at the last meeting. So from that perspective, in terms of like, you know, did you meet the assignment that we gave you last time? I think we did, and to the extent that, we need to do any floor amendments to tweak those things. I think we can handle them, I would say, pretty easily, just based off of the items that have been outlined so far.
Just in terms of urban design, maybe it's not important because it's partially up to what the applicant wants to do, but something that I think maybe Heidi brought up intrigued me, which was the idea that some of the housing proposed could be constructed over the surface parking lot, and that could be a way to preserve the overall necessary program to make the project financially viable, but give you a little bit more site to work with in some ways. If, for example, if you wanted to preserve an additional structure that wasn't preserved in the original plan, as one possible way that could be used. And if the roof of the building was a green roof, and if stormwater was it might be neutral or beneficial to stormwater, as compared to the base case.
I want to try to really be careful not to design this project in this form.
Well, can I ask a question? So this says MPC report and recommendations. So because you say recommendations, couldn't there be a recommendation in there to look at what Adam is talking about and also what Jim is discussing? Because you do have it in our minutes that we think there should be more communication and understanding where all the parties fall in this. And so it's not just Station Circle or Town Square, landscape architects, Tim Rubin, council. It's also Planning Commission, it's the HARB. I mean, I really think this is a huge undertaking, a project that's really changing downtown Narberth. And it involves all parties. And I think that if we're going to say, and recommendations, it's one thing if you're just reporting on what Tim Rubin said. But I think the recommendations part is this whole separate. I mean, you have background discussion and then discussion items, but then recommendations is the last part at the bottom that says we need to consider this an impactful project that really does require more total involvement of all parties.
Yeah, I would also add that there's, and I'm sure everybody here is aware of this, there's a tremendous amount of fear and apprehension in the community about what's going to happen on that site. And I think the more open and the more open the process can be, the better. Because there's a lot of crazy stuff being said about what's going to happen. And a lot of people are really scared that it's going to destroy the downtown.
Well, let me say a word about this. The goal, I think everyone has expressed that. This has been expressed by members of the Planning Commission since last year, this idea. And you can be sure that most of the conversations I have with anyone else in this room convey that point. The purpose of this is to say this gentleman came to us with this informal proposal, wanted our feedback on it, and here's our reaction. It's not to design the site, to engineer the site. It's simply say, here are the things we think you need to start thinking about when you come back. The goal is to get an application, is to get a land development application, which would then enable us to really, in the public forum, have these conversations about a real proposal that, is something that's officially presented to the public and so forth. Because I agree, right now we're sort of chasing shadows of this meeting and that and the other. So the goal here is simply to provide our reaction to what I saw, what we saw, and what we heard, and in a sense, send a signal of what we'd like to see worked on. So, for example, I think, generally we've shied away at doing things like requesting green roofs, because what we've looked at, what we've been interested is in talking about things that are performative, and that's because until you get a real application in front of you, you can't really talk about that. It's in these kinds, the green roof is not a goal, it's a means to get to a goal. And so the goals are to incorporate certain kinds of practices, to reach certain thresholds of carbon emissions, meet certain thresholds of stormwater management. There are ways to do that. that may be more or less appropriate at particular sites. So I don't want to get hung up on details, like let's tell them to put a green roof on there. It's premature. It's premature to say, why don't you design your building this way? Because we haven't even seen a three-dimensional model yet. So I think in this, I think that we can encourage him to explore configurations that allow him to get the floor, different configurations that let him to get the floor plans that he needs and preserve more buildings. I think that's fine, but I want to try not to be super specific if we can, because I think the time for that is when we actually have a real proposal.
I don't think we're being specific. I think we're being extremely general. And I think what I'm saying anyway, is that this is a project that doesn't just involve some buildings along Haverford Avenue. It involves the parking lot. It involves Town Square. And it's in a downtown that is the context. And we need to pay attention to the context. And Dave's right, people are gonna be like freaking out when they think that Ruben's gonna come in and put another row that's like the other ones he's building. It's gonna, I think I'll stop, but I think what we're saying is it's a bigger project. It's not just about a few buildings on Hartford.
And that is what planning is. It's connectivity among ideas. And we can't look at this as, one flow of traffic here and another flow of traffic here. We need to establish a connectivity or not. And that will decide a lot of other dynamics as a result of this development. And along the lines of what you were saying, Heidi, about context, we can look at the lines and the flow and the dynamics all day long, but what will be the program for Town Square? Are they saying that Saturday mornings there will be a farmer's market where they've got something planned in terms of pavement or stage area? Because if that's the case, then traffic flow will not work either. So we really need to understand the program and the form of what's being proposed in both cases, to really gain the credibility of the public.
So, Todd, I think what you were trying to say in summary was the goal was to have the applicant file for an application and then have public discussion about that application and hopefully get, to a good place with the project. And so the first step is to get the application filed. Maybe that's not explicit enough in the memo that you put together because it doesn't talk about, for example, have the applicant submit a tentative sketch plan. Or what's the next step? Is that so that we could cover these issues?
Well, procedurally, it would be to either submit a tentative or preliminary sketch plan.
So, should we basically suggest, it would be appropriate for the applicant to submit a tentative sketch plan at this stage?
Yes, I think that would be, from my point of view, that would be entirely appropriate, because that is really what it will take to keep this process going and to keep it going in public.
So we should just come out and say that.
Right.
Yeah, so we should say that, and then we can get to the, because everyone wants to talk about the issues, but to the point, it's not right to talk about them.
Well, some I think are too, I think another crack at the language about Station Circle is merited, because it is another planning process that is occurring. At this moment, I'm not exactly sure where it landed, except for the two sketches, but I certainly think, I know a statement that says that the planning of this site needs to be considered in conjunction with the planning of that site, because the borough's invested in resources to plan that, is a possible thing to say.
Well, would it be appropriate to say perhaps the borough ought to think about linking the Station Circle project to this potential development application project? If they're linked, half of the project is the borough's project.
What does that mean? I don't know how you link a public.
It means that the final design and construction of Station Circle
probably shouldn't be finalized until the whole plan is finalized.
I don't think
they-
there's
so
any
they-
danger of anything being finalized anytime soon.
So all I'm saying is that it should be a total downtown site plan that includes the project.
That would be the rational thing to do. There's always a time for that to happen. It'd be a great first.
Okay, I want to understand this idea a little better because I got to think about how it gets written up. So Adam, what does that, like, that means what kinds of things? Circulation, parking?
Yeah,
open
so
space, what?
the Station Circle project design, including circulation and landscape, should be designed to be compatible with the Haverford Avenue project,
Okay.
which hasn't been filed yet, so that you can't make it compatible until it's
Coordinated with.
And that any plans that are submitted should include both sites.
I would probably say it the other way around, is that the 230 Haverford project should be designed to be compatible with the Town Square project.
Yeah.
I agree, it's just that the borough controls the Town Square project. So that's their side of the two projects.
I guess what Dave is driving at is who's driving the bus.
Exactly.
And I think the town square is going to be what we perceive more directly as the center of town. I think. It's too early to really
And
tell.
I think taxpayers will
I
be
mean-
far more willing to support the primary agenda of the town square than they would the primary agenda of 230.
I mean, or to put it another way, if the Town Square project had been, had been done 10 or 15 years ago, or the earlier iteration was one that we loved and where it wasn't going to change, then the developer of 230 Haverford would be given an existing condition that he had to work with. So,
Well, I agree with Todd that if the goal is to try to get the applicant to actually submit through the process, until that happens, there's nothing to do, right? But the sooner the better to get the process going, right? And then it sounds like the Borough Council and others have concern about parking management for the downtown in total. The borough no longer controls that parking lot. And so the best way to, plan the downtown as a whole is to do the site plan for the whole downtown.
It's a great opportunity.
well, for me,
Yeah.
more than anything, it's what Jim was talking, we need to kickstart the Town Square project back to life. We had a working committee that were left out for reasons not entirely clear from a series of meetings between, I guess, the borough manager and the landscape architects. And I think we need to re-energize the process to bring the group back together,
And the Rubin team,
ideally,
no, they were involved
Okay,
in at least one meeting that I heard about
okay.
secondhand.
Well, this was all second, third, and fourth hand.
And this is, folks, this is not sunshine. This is the opposite of sunshine. This is obfuscation. And we can't tolerate that. This is where bad stuff happens.
It sounds to me like the sense of everyone is to incorporate in this letter a stronger, well, first of all, clear language that says our goal is to have this project moved into a public process, through the land development process, so that these discussions can be held in public forums. And I think that can be incorporated quite easily. And then in terms of Station Circle, I'm trying to think about how to describe the relationship we're kind of easing towards here, which is at the very least, the Station Circle, the Station Circle planning process establishes sort of like a kind of like a public benchmark for, like, I don't know what word you'd use, like a vision. I don't know that it's like a detailed, literal How would you characterize it? Is it more at a vision level, or is it a schematic, or is it an actual?
Scheme,
Right, so concept, a scheme
concept,
Well,
yeah.
for,
and for us, it's, who were on the committee, it's a little difficult to say since we were basically left out of the process. So I don't know exactly how far along these concepts have been developed.
but
Not a
that,
clue. And I think whatever it is, it's still at a fairly schematic level.
right.
Who was the point of contact? Was that Samantha?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But the,
She was used to running Bristol Township that way. I will say that, I don't know if she's listening. She was accustomed to having much more control in a township that wasn't blessed with the wealth of talent that we have here. Okay, so she really was not used to tapping that kind of resource, and led her quite naturally to be more of a one-man band.
let's try to focus on the way to proceed here.
Well, can I ask, do we have, or are we going shortly to have a new borough manager? Does
The
anybody
borough
know?
is searching for new borough manager.
Because, I mean, to re-energize the town square project, I'm not sure if that can happen in the absence of a borough manager, or even if a new borough manager would really be
Right.
of much use.
Well,
So,
yeah,
It's a little bit
it's
of a
hard to know, but I
head-scratcher.
guess what I'm really trying to like make sure we get correct is the sort of language about how the plans that have been developed so far, the concepts that have been developed so far for Station Square relate to what we anticipate will be a proposal for 230 Haverford.
well,
That's what we need to include in this letter.
well, then what I would suggest is that in the absence of a borough manager, and so the entire working committee can know how things were left, that we should arrange a meeting with the landscape architect and to have a reorientation session of where the design was left off when, at this point, when Samantha left. And so we at least have some basis of starting a discussion when we have a new borough manager.
Todd, would you like me to respond to any of these points? I don't have to.
Well, we don't usually take public comment in the middle of conversations. This is the planning commission open hearing from Councilmember Livingston.
Yes.
At this point?
Oh.
Okay. All right, you have the floor.
So as far as hiring the borough manager, the applications for the new position closed on April 28th, and it's hoped that we'll have a new person in place sometime in July. By the time we pick the person and they give notice at their current employment, and so on and so forth. As far as Station Circle goes, I believe all the plans that we have so far are posted publicly. There's no there's no shadow set of plans.
And is the borough currently seeking grants to implement those plans?
They have received a grant to implement those plans. So, but I believe this will be, some of this stuff will be discussed at Thursday night's, a council workshop meeting about the, sort of next steps in this process. So it will be timely if you had a letter, requesting more information by them. And as far as the process goes for 230 Haverford, I think some assumptions are being made here that are assumptions, and they're not necessarily consistent with what's going on. A lot of this stuff happens in executive session because it involves real estate deals, because the borough currently owns that parking lot, or that's part of the negotiation. But I just don't jump to too many conclusions about sort of nefarious actions. That's not what's going on. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, let's not jump to conclusions, but what I think what we're hoping for is that by having conversations in public, then these issues can be debated publicly, discussed publicly, and because they can't be at the moment, because we don't, it's not necessarily that it's nefarious, it's simply that there's not a whole lot. The only thing really on the public record right now is the application that was filed in 2019 and the concept that was presented 2 months ago. Aside from that, the public and we really don't know anything. And so the goal here is to sort of bring the conversation about these topics, about Station Square, about, green architecture into public, and so that we can meaningfully discuss them. And it's not meant to ascribe a motive, it's just meant to say that it's time for these conversations to be. And by having a land development application, that's the process by which this happens, right? It's time to have an application that we can then talk about and look at as a community.
Well, I completely agree with everything you said, Todd, and I'll just say that council encouraged Mr. Rubin to come to Planning Council, to the Planning Commission, to make that presentation for the very reason you stated.
And I know it took a lot of effort, so we do appreciate that. And that was a great step, because now we're able to at least talk about what he presented in March, right? And we're able to give feedback and hope that he comes back with an application that starts to grapple with the feedback that we're going to give him. In terms of Station Circle, it sounds like what we're hoping to say is when you come with an application, we want that application to reflect the thinking that's already gone into Station Square, and to incorporate that into the way you discuss the site, the way it works, and because these are all sort of integral to each other, and together are sort of the core of downtown. Is that fair to say that we need to see when he makes an application how Station Square is being incorporated into his thinking, so that we can evaluate that and then come back and make more specific responses to that we didn't see that when he made his presentation.
Mm-hmm.
That would be helpful.
And I guess for the record, what exists about Station Square is what's on the webpage, the schemes, concepts, whatever.
I think the other thing that's missing, in my understanding at least, is that there was a lot of effort apparently on pursuing the tunnel under the tracks at Essex Avenue. And it seemed to me, and I say seemed because I don't know if this is factual or not, that a lot of the effort in terms of finding grant money or public money or whatever had to do with that effort. And it seemed, again, in my perception, it seemed to shift the focus of the design exercise away from the town square per se to that more isolated area of the tunnel and the accessibility aspect of how both the town square and the station might be made handicapped accessible. Now, I don't know if some or all of that is accurate or not, but I think, at least from where I'm sitting, if we can get a little clarity on where that process is and how that meshes with the design of the town square, that would be very helpful.
Well, the grant did not come through for that. So that is DOA, that whole concept for the foreseeable future. And I think that.
Okay, I don't know what that means.
I think you're right that the Station Square effort was sort of de-energized in favor of pursuing a very large, what would have been a very large grant for the tunnel across the tracks, under the tracks. Would have been a great thing, didn't happen, time to refocus back to where we were before. before that, let's call it a distraction occurred.
Well, okay.
I think, I don't want to get too far into that, because I think it's probably at this point enough to say that, I don't know whether the plan currently includes the tunnel or not, but when we see an application, it should take into account what the plans are. And, it may be that it is also fair to ask, well, when I finish this, I'm going to also propose another intermediate step to the application. So at that point, we might also ask for a briefing on Station Circle. But I want to stick with the comments on these recommendations. I do want to take into consideration what Adam and Jen were talking about, and it may be worth saying that in the green building, I think it is safe to say that even though the green building ordinance only goes so far, that everyone here has kind of considered that to be a floor and not a roof, so to speak. That we all think that depending on the nature of the project, the situation, that we want applicants to consider additional green building practices. We just know that we can't prescribe them in a code. And so I also think, to reflect what you guys are saying, we could add to the green building that not only do we want to see the confirmation of the desire to construct the project following the green building ordinance provisions, but also enter into conversations about other green building practices that are feasible and appropriate for the site, so that door can be open when they come in with a proposal. It's hard to prescribe right now what the right one is, but that it sets the expectation that there's more to talk about.
Yeah, and I don't want to say this in a prescriptive way at all, but like in our capacity here, these projects must be engaged with eyes wide open. I think sometimes, with form zoning and established codes, et cetera, we have to sort of take form where it's given. But in the case of reusing existing this or that, or looking at the site to see what's available, like, those are the kinds of situations where we just have to really tap our resources as thinking, seeing people and make those recommendations. I'm not sure, I don't know what the opportunities will be at 230 Haverford, based on some of the comments that were made at that meeting, but we'll see.
So those are three general types of modifications. One is to state that our goal is to seek a formal application so that this project can enter into the public process of discussion, that in terms of parking and circulation, proposal should take into account and demonstrate how it is interacting with the plans that have Groves developed for Station Circle. Again, that allows us then to kind of examine that and take that into consideration, and then that in addition to the following provisions of the ordinance that we're asking council to approve about green building, that be regarded as sort of the baseline, and that other green building practices should be considered and incorporated as feasible based on the nature of the project and so forth. We've discussed those things many times. So that's what I'm hearing about things we can do to strengthen this letter. If there's no other big topics, I know that a couple people here tonight are here to talk about this topic, at least Kathleen is, so if you don't mind, can we open it to public comment, this topic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll open this topic, public comment. I know Kathleen, you're here to speak about that, and anyone else who'd like to speak, or are you just here to listen?
I'm just here to listen tonight.
Okay, I'm
but
sorry.
Thank you, that's okay.
Dennis, did you want to make any
No,
comments?
same here, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Is there anyone online is watching who would like to make public comment on this topic? Okay. So what I would like to do is propose a kind of a mini step, which is to send this letter to council so that they can consider it in their own kind of interactions and communications with Tim Rubin, and to invite Tim back to our meeting potentially in June, if he wishes, before he files an application, to see how he would respond and react to all this. At which point, we could also ask the borough to give us a briefing on Station Circle as well, so we hear it all at once. I don't know if that will work. The borough is incredibly short-staffed and a lot of institutional memory is gone, but we could at least
They don't all have to come.
suggest that. Pardon me?
They don't all have to attend.
Does that sound, so I guess, does everyone feel like it's a good approach, or do you have other thoughts about that?
Fine.
Okay. So if there's no other comments about this, we can move on to another topic. Are there any other questions or comments about this? Okay.
Well, I asked one question just
Yeah.
procedurally, so we're gonna invite them in June, which will be the next meeting.
Right.
So I think that the expectation, right, is that you're gonna incorporate the comments and then circulate the letter, try to get them back here in June, is that?
Yes, send it to council and ask council to invite them here in June. And the hope would be that, well, I think the hope is that then that would create a situation where then they could submit an application.
Can I make a request?
Sure.
I'm not going to be at the June meeting. Is it possible to have a special meeting? Is that another option, or, I don't know whether Ruben's team is ready to present.
I don't
So
either.
could we find out if they are, and if it has to be that meeting, I could try to listen in.
Well, let me just ask, if we were to have a special meeting, when would you suggest that to be?
I'm open.
Okay. Well, can we put a pause on that, because 714 Montgomery will lead us to the same
Okay.
discussion. So in terms of 714 Montgomery, you know that I submitted reports to council, and I also forwarded to Michael Freeman a summary of our comments on his proposal that he made to us earlier this year. And so he has our written comments. And I know, you also know that several of us have been working on potential sketches that we could use, that we could send him to kind of illustrate those ideas. And so I know that there were various iterations, and Jennifer kind of took the final pass. And what I would like to do is pass out where she landed on these. And what I'd like to do is propose that these also go to Michael. These
But
are,
it's the same as we saw last?
Yeah.
they're a little
It's a
different.
little,
They're a little
it bakes in the comments that we discussed.
Okay.
I think I made it, so.
But the house hasn't moved, right?
The idea here is
No,
not,
it did not look that.
the idea
These
here,
all the same?
there's three, they're all the same,
Oh, they're
but they're
stapled together.
different looks. It's all the same idea, but there's different
Levels.
levels. So what, the goal here is not, again, to design the project. It's to show how the ideas that we proposed to
You
Michael,
want to see that?
Thank you.
is to show how the ideas we proposed to Michael could be accommodated in a site plan. The goal here, again, is to kind of reach a point where is to suggest an idea in hopes of reaching a point where we can kind of agree very conceptually, so that this gives him direction to come in with an application for a new project. So this isn't a fully designed or rendered plan, it's just sort of an illustration of how the ideas we put on the table could potentially be arranged. It's really like a proof of concept. Like, we gave him a bunch of guidance that was verbal, and this is sort of a proof of concept that, like, you can actually do what we were saying. And so please consider this and come back with an application, which might look different in many ways, but it's again, the point is to get us kind of unstuck, to get us to an application that we can discuss. So I guess understanding that may not be the exact drawing you would have made, because it wasn't the exact drawing that anybody made. It is a composition of different ideas that we've expressed in our meetings. I'd like to make sure everyone is comfortable in sending this out to accompany the notes that we gave him. What, again, in trying to get to an application being filed, one of the things we're trying to navigate is, we do have a zoning proposal for the 5B district that we recommend to council in November. With a zoning proposal to allow, within the 45-foot shell that already exists for that district, to allow apartments and to allow 4 stories instead of 3. That is something we already recommended to council. Council is sitting on it. And council is sort of waiting for the sense that there is kind of a convergence of agreement on a general idea for housing before they would contemplate that zoning change. So what this is trying to do is get us to the point where we can kind of say, yeah, we kind of agree on this direction. And we know we need to develop it more, we know we need this, things to work out, but this is sort of an agreeable direction to go. So that's part of the reason for doing this. And as with the other project, the proposal would be to invite Michael back, send this to him and invite him back in June and ask for his reaction and see if he feels like this is a workable concept. So it's another, we've already conveyed this to him in words, it's just conveying it in a drawing, and with the premise that we would send this and invite him back in June. And in the spirit of doing this openly, this would then become part of our minutes and so forth, so everyone can see what we are discussing. And then he could come back in June and tell us whether he thinks it'll fly or not. So we have that conversation. The goal of this is to get the conversation again into public, so that then we can proceed with a application.
So we're proposing that we send this to the applicant.
Yeah. Yeah, to accompany notes that we've already sent him from our minutes and meetings and so forth.
And this is intended to be an apartment building.
Yes, because we've already recommended to council that apartment buildings could be considered in this area.
So does that mean we're suggesting that there are residential units in the house?
Doesn't mean that we're suggesting that, no.
I think
Well, this makes a big difference whether it's all residential or whether it's a mixed-use development, doesn't it? I guess what I'm suggesting is there's probably a little more information to send these out without a little more information, I think would be potentially confusing to the developer.
So what information would you feel, aside, in addition to the written?
Well, I think there needs to be some information about what these 3 plans represent in terms of what levels they are, how they interact with each other. Because it's not clear to me, and I'm fairly familiar with the project. What's down a half level, what's up a half level, how the residential floors stack above it. I think that needs to be clarified a bit.
So then I have just a question real quick. Is the second drawing, is that just to show the gross floor plate, or what does the second drawing represent?
Just massing of the floor plates.
We could leave the second drawing as,
It could be, either it could be eliminated and just send the conceptual
it's like
third and the site plan.
it's like, it's a ground floor plan and a second floor, third floor plan.
Yeah.
And I would just, it's a minor detail, but unless there's a reason for it, the corridor for the apartments doesn't need to go to the perimeter wall.
Yeah.
I mean, you can put a window, but that would allow you to get
This is
more.
super conceptual.
Yeah, it was
And a super conceptual plan with square footages for each apartment, so
Yeah, well,
it will add to the square footage
That would be my argument.
leasable.
be less specific.
Well, why don't you bring that up?
My argument is it should be less specific. So as not to draw attention to little goofy things like the little MEP space next to the stair, for example. We shouldn't be identifying that sort of thing at this level. This should be a total cartoon. I mean, I see the logic here of this, but
I think
giving him the overall square footage that's dedicated to units without drawing any demising lines of any kind, showing where a stair and an elevator stack might be, okay, but make it as even dumber than it is drawn now.
which we had, and then conversations in kind of small group kind of circled back to wanting to show proof of concept for how small we could shrink the floor plate and how many units in it was,
Yeah.
square footage. So at that point, it was getting drafted by hand and drafting on the computer anyway, just to prove
Yeah.
that we could get a unit count, so why
Yeah,
not
but you
provide
shouldn't
it?
have to prove that at this point.
But you kind of needed to
Well,
know in order to make the
yeah.
argument that you could reduce the floor plate to 8,000 square feet.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, I think it's understood that you could change the exact configuration of the floor, but it just shows that, it's just one way to separate it out into apartments, right?
I think it's a very generous exercise. I think it works. I like the way the site is delineated. I think that showing the breakdown of units is a suggestion. It's not written in stone. And I commend you for this. I think it's really very good. I like that the driveway is off of Meeting House Lane. I think you offer a variety of sizes. It shows a range. I mean, I would read it as a suggestion, and I think it's good.
And notes can be added to each page before we send it out to indicate more clearly what everything is.
Right, to your point, if you put notes on here, like what's not included, I mean, as you start designing it, it's like you want to start designing it, which I know is not the intent, right? So, but I do think, there's no landscape shown and so on, so we just want to emphasize, like, obviously, there should be a landscape plan and so on, so. But the other key thing about this, is that the developer applicant saw a lot of value in the driveway from Montgomery for the business to be located, to lease the house as an office. But I think that, I actually think the property would have more value without the driveway personally.
Absolutely.
So
And
this-
the parking is like adjacent to the building in the back.
Yeah, this plan actually has more parking than what was originally proposed, and with only one curb cut would allow for street parking the full length of the balance of the property line. So it's actually more parking than what was presented by the last iteration, and does give direct access to the rear of the building.
So why would you have that?
Instead of having the driveway,
Well, instead of just one driveway.
so we just did one two-way instead of having it.
Oh,
through.
instead of having it here.
Yeah, so this needs the 25 feet on the left-hand side needs a label. It just calls it out as rear yard
But why
setback.
not have the driveway on this side?
We had laid it out and conversations had been of holding back the development 25 feet from the adjacent property line and adding the driveway is, while not the building, is still developing space directly adjacent to the residential property. And if we could fit the parking without needing the additional driveway.
I guess, so my immediate reaction is that it's really a shame to make that all blacktop.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was the garden that was shared between the lobby of the apartment building and the Price House. And that's set off the back of the Price House by having the driveway over here and not having this circulation, driving circulation between these two buildings.
But that could
It's
be
unfortunate.
worked in, right? Like, this is just preliminary, like.
No, you're showing it. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You're showing blacktop and and also having 2 additional parking spaces, that's gratuitous. I'm not sure that, Why show extra?
I mean, it was becoming problematic to lay out legal driveways. So even with having a driveway this way or doing your driveway entrance here in order to fit at least 18 spaces, I ended up having to put
So that's
parking.
another question.
Well,
Where
what's
did-
more problematic is you have a use in the house that has parking requirements. And without knowing what that use is, we don't know what those
His
parking
last
requirements
proposal was for it to be commercial use.
are. Well,
That's,
but those parking spaces aren't accounted for, as far as I can see. Is that correct?
How many parking spaces total is it?
I think it
20.
accounts for what's required.
20 on-site.
How many apartments is it?
We don't know.
Well, how many square footage?
Well,
of
at the
parking?
moment, we're showing 6 a floor
And there's,
and 3 floors.
You may want bigger ones, smaller ones. I mean, again, this is not a formal proposal.
I
folks.
understand, I
It's an
understand,
illustration.
but I'm just trying to,
Right.
but we're discussing
Yeah.
the site plan that we're sending as a committee.
Right.
And the parking was the topic of discussion, and the parking is driven by the program. So if the program is 12 apartments, and there's 20 parking spaces, you know, the question is about right? And the bigger the apartments get, the fewer parking spaces you will need,
Right.
right? So, these are pretty small apartments, so it's about 12. Anyway, so you know, and it's a law office, it's like 6 parking spaces, or 5 parking spaces, and it's like, it more or less about fits, it's not, it's, you know, it's, and then I fully expect the applicant to fight for that driveway, but I personally think it'll work without it. So, and this is our concept, I guess. He's gonna want it, but I wouldn't be surprised.
He's
This
gonna fight
scheme
for which
shows 3
driveway?
floors of
One already
over
has.
a lobby and
Oh.
parking.
Kind of hard to tell.
No.
And he already has it, so it's already.
So to clarify, this scheme shows the possibility of including parking on the ground with a lobby on the ground, fronting meeting house. So you maintain the frontage that would be required if you build a building there. And allows for the possibility of 3 stories above, as the zoning proposal we've already recommended would allow for. And in those 3 floors is a certain number of square feet. It can be configured as a lot of small units or a few big units. I think, though, the way to look at parking is how many spaces are on the site?
20.
20. And, you know, although we don't allow for on-curb parking to be considered in 5B, it's certainly something we could investigate. And so I think there's up to 4 more spots there. And so that's 24. And so that more than allows for a capacity of the number of units and for offices there on that site. So it's sort of to prove that, yes, you can have, you know, I think when he came to us, he said, the number, he said 15 was the number he was aiming for. So you can have 15, and you can have an office building, and you can park it, more or less, and you can do it in this way. So I think that's, without having a formal proposal, that's kind of what this demonstrates. That you can do what he said he wanted to do, which was 15 units was the starting point. It grew after that, but he said 15. There's 11 proposed in the current proposal, so, and you can use the house for offices, and it can kind of work.
And we could just eliminate, like after this conversation, eliminate the plan that shows boxed out units and just label it as how many per floor.
It's just square footage
Yeah.
per floor. I mean,
It's a
I
good
just,
start.
like, in order to lay out the parking and its most efficient, I needed to know where the stair towers were landing in order to know approximate locations of stair towers, right? Like, they all start working in tandem in order to be able to lay out the building as it is. But now that information could be peeled back and just provide a site plan that shows building outline and parking, and then a building footprint that calls out the rest of it.
Yeah, I think it should be more schematic and less hardlined. as it looks.
And additional notes about landscaping and buffers between the apartment building and the adjacent
Maybe
property.
rather than, maybe you just show color blocking, like
Mhm.
commercial residential parking, you know, for each layer, level.
I mean, to me, this space is wasted space. It's, you know, that would have been, except for the fact that there's a really nice tree back there.
which space?
To the west of the building, that corner between the parking area and Montgomery.
Yeah. Well, see, when you put it at grade, everything at grade, then it's next to someone's house. And so,
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that sliver is
No,
the
I'm
one
talking
that
about
pulls
this,
to
the
the
one that's
commercial
next to
on
the
Montgomery.
commercial area. That's where parking
Can you
should
hold it
go.
up and point to what you're talking about?
This area right here.
Oh,
Well, that's right now there's an annex wing there, but.
There's a garage, there's a newer garage, there's also an addition back here which isn't being shown.
It's being demolished in this plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which, I mean, that's why I hate that it's so hard-lined, because if somebody wanted to create a really pretty plan back here, there would be a way to circumnavigate the tree and that existing structure, which when you take it off, is going to be a huge scar at the back of the building, because it's been there for a really long time.
yeah, but I like that there's undeveloped property there that can be cultivated with trees and vegetation, and it will frame a historic property in its natural context, which is, green, like
But this whole side, but the other side of it is all parking. I mean, I just
Yeah, I
don't
think
quite understand that.
We were focusing on what the perspective would be from Montgomery if the building encroaches closer to the historic, where it then starts looking like it's.
We're surrounding the building with green as much as the parcel allows, which is.
No, we're not.
From the main
No, we are, we're
frontage
actually
of Montgomery.
depaving the driveway in this plan, and we're not crowding it on the triangular wedge of the lot that's left over. So the whole frontage is what it is, and then the behind it will be this, I guess, 4-story building, which is, it's gonna be behind it, but that's what it is. It's set back as far as it can be, and then there's a 25-foot setback from the existing residential area, which could be very nice. And that's a big yard. I mean, it can be landscaped. So there's a lot of opportunity to landscape the rest of the parcel that's left. And then the ground floor of the lobby is shown as over 2,000 square feet. So you can put in the gym or the restaurant or whatever you want. That's commercial, whatever you want for the ground floor below the upper floors.
I didn't go measure it, but on site, the existing paving does go fairly close to the back of the original building.
Oh, no, I know that. That's what we're
So
trying to
it's-
get rid
yeah,
of.
well, but I guess from the perspective of now you have new building and the entire front facade of Montgomery is now going to be recommended to be more holistically landscaped instead of just the grass that it is.
Yeah, and I think what's really impressive is that there seems to be, it reads like there's an intentionality. You have very low density at the floor of the property, to the front of Montgomery. And then you have this higher density, configured, worked, 4 stories of units. Clearly, that was the effort, was to maintain the integrity of the historic property and develop, totally max out the space allocated behind for development. I mean, I think
It's a very respectful treatment of the Price House.
yes.
And it can get better if the long straight lines that are shown here get some wiggles in them.
right. And it can't get better unless we get the applicant here to talk to us about it.
Right.
So that's what we,
I think I'll just add some color for landscaping and some additional notes and eliminate the floor plate plans. We'll just give an overall building footprint with a square footage per floor plate and then the site plan. And label them as recommendations.
okay.
And I just wanted to thank you all for, because my one comment was very much more pedestrian than everyone else's, literally pedestrian, which was that I hated the idea of the continuing vehicular access off of Montgomery Avenue, because you're walking down there and someone's trying to not get their car hit and they cut in on a driveway through there, and so I really appreciate that y'all,
It's a great place for no driveway.
yeah. So I thank you for incorporating that.
I know we talked about it, if he could get an easement to that, is it the bank, cafe, Royal Cafe parking?
it's not I mean, you might lose a space or something, but it's not incompatible with this plan to have, anyway, forget it, it's fine.
He wasn't interested in that, yeah.
So the suggestion here too is to invite, since Michael is saying this, we think this is kind of proof that what we recommended can be accomplished. Would you be willing to come in and talk to us about your reactions to that, and then hopefully that would lead to an application. And I would also propose that, see, part of also what I'm trying to navigate here is get to the point where council will pass the green zoning code, which will enable all this. And so I think what they'd like to see is a little movement about moving towards a solution for this. So what I'd like to do is have them both come in.
Only because
We have one.
needs 15 apartments, whatever, I don't know. And who says he has to have 15
Well,
apartments?
We have one conversation.
That's what's happening.
What's that?
I'm being fresh. Being fresh.
That's, to me, that's him driving the ship here when we thought we were gonna try to tell him, oh, you know what, we think, yeah, 15 spaces is fine. And you can make it, you show him this, he says, oh, boy, I get all my apartments, it's great.
Hopefully the owl is listening.
I don't know. So,
The owl never misses a beat.
what I was trying to say was, council is looking for signals that we are close to a concept we can all agree on, and that Michael is ready to submit an application for it before they pass the green building zones and the 5B zoning. And so, which would enable then this application to occur.
But can I just ask again, what's the story with the addition on the back that I think still needs hard approval, doesn't it?
Yeah, we would.
To demolish it?
It's not clear, and let me discuss that in a second. But what I'm trying to do is lay out a strategy to get closer to concepts we can agree on so that council's confident they can address the zoning issues, and then so we can get an application that we can actually start working with. That's the chart, and of course I'm trying to chart here. So what I'd like to do is invite them both here, 230 Haverford and 714 Montgomery in June, which leads me back to your question about special meeting. It may be that in June we need to have a special meeting because there may be too much to handle, which I'd like to alert you to that. We don't need to schedule it now, but I'll be in touch with you, and I hope you'll pay attention and respond about finding additional dates in June in case we have too much workload to handle in one meeting. Because if we have to handle both of these, we won't be able to handle them both in one meeting. But I think it's important to keep the public, get this in the public to keep these going.
Can I mention a little brief thing? This plan, I know it's just conceptual and it might not matter at all, but they did in the revised plan, the applicant pulled the sidewalk back from Montgomery and went ahead and put in a 6-foot green between the sidewalk and Montgomery. I don't know if you want to just show that just to make sure
Okay, that's a good check.
it's not misleading to them to say, oh no, actually, you can move the sidewalk.
thank
Which I
you.
know the plan isn't about that, but just so there's no confusion.
Right.
Yes, we do want the sidewalk pulled back, please.
So, before we talk about the harm, what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everyone, is open to public comment. And we can invite the chair of the harm here to make comments about this, or Kathleen, if you'd like to make comments, or Jim, but we can see what you guys think about all this
I'm
before
happy
we
to
proceed.
say a couple of small things. First of all, I mean, I think this is a good step, and it's very consistent with what in several meetings you guys have recommended to him. And he, you know, he's not been willing to move the idea of access off of Montgomery Avenue. I think this shows how it can be done, and hopefully, you know, and so you're giving him a pretty concrete example showing how it really could work and why it really is better. It certainly treats the house better, keeps it from having a wide ramp running right up against it to access, to allow cars to go into an underground parking. So it really treats the house a lot better. It also gives an option, I think keeping that that side porch gives an option for use. I mean, it allows him, maybe he wants, maybe a restaurant goes into that first floor, maybe. I mean, he hasn't, there's been very little discussion of the rehab of that particular building. This gives an option for, if they say it was a restaurant, that's seating, that's outdoor seating if it's opened up, you know what I mean? So I think this gives more and more options. It certainly treats the building better. We would have, I mean, demolition of that rear addition is something that I believe that we at the Heart would have an issue with. It is that demolition, and it's demolition of a component of the building that definitely falls within the sort of time purview that we're looking in. Preservation recognizes that buildings do change over time. Buildings get additions for different uses, and so that's something that is accepted. It's not a case of just rolling it back to what it may have been like in 1803 when it was built. I mean, and clearly retention of that 20th century side porch is an example of that too. So, but I think this is a good step, and I think looking at parking issues, and I think maybe being able to, again, not being so prescriptive to then allow for less parking would then probably free up that area in the back. So I mean, I think you're absolutely right with kind of giving him something to look at, but again, not being too detailed in it. But I can just say from the Heart standpoint, we would definitely have a long, hard discussion about whether or not we would want those rear additions to go. They're significant in their materials, they're significant in their design. You know, they weren't something that was just thrown on there for the heck of it. So anyway, so that's the sort of my initial thought about this. So.
Okay.
We'll have spirited discussion about that.
Yes.
Does anyone else in the public want to comment?
I have a question. Is there actually a question about whether the demolition of the rear additions would come before HARB? Because I think, Dennis, you're assuming that you would have a discussion about it. And I'm not understanding if that's actually what would occur.
Well, without answering your question directly, I think it would be a good idea for if I may, Dennis, for you to kind of proactively ask that question, to clarify that with Kevin, and this is not the forum to do that, but with Kevin, the zoning officer, and the solicitor, if he came in with this kind of review, what the HARB's purview is.
So the question would be, would this be a COA review or would it not be? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to speak to that because I'm, this is not, I'm not the chair. Second, this is not the forum. But I would think it would be a good idea to kind of pre-review that. And, I do that all the time with applications. I'll call the solicitor, I'll call Kevin and say like, what's the planning commission's role here? And so I think you'd be better off just doing that directly.
Yeah, we have another project that we've just done that with.
Yeah, because you're new, the HARB's new, and we're feeling this all out. So I would say just kind of proactively figure out what the realm is here.
But I mean, as you had suggested, we've been proactive with inviting the developer to come and talk with the HARB. There's been no response. And we worked through Samantha on that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to having that kind of conversation about this particular project. So yeah, and I definitely sort of commend this exercise, this attempt to sort of give him something to be responding to, because he did not seem to be hearing it when you gave it to him in other ways at other meetings. So I mean, I maybe if it's written down, it'll land. So I want to commend him for that.
Well, it depends a little bit on how we present it to him. We have to be very careful not to be argumentative with him. He does not take kindly to that.
Let's try not to personalize our conversations.
But I do think that it is a virtue of the work that's presented here on the page, is that, if there are any arguments, for lack of a better word, to be made, that, the numbers and the lines and the configurations are there, so to be disproven, I suppose. So why not present it all, show it all, and, can take and make of it what you want.
Almost like which one?
I think the spirit of this is to say we're trying to offer a path forward. And let's not read more into it about that than that, I think, would be the spirit here. We recognize then we could clarify this is not a prescriptive path, but this is sort of a proof that what we've been suggesting could potentially work, and take this and work with it. And then come back, let us know what you think, and if it's close, then we can get an application and start in the review process. And you can find out how, when nothing is not clear, Dennis, is the order of operations, like when does the art review occur compared to other reviews, and so that's another thing for you to
Right,
inquire about.
and we've had this conversation, it's like, we're working similar to the same side of the street, we really need to be working together on this, which we have been.
Creative hands.
So I think that's, we need to keep doing that, but.
Okay, before we shift to zoning revisions, are there any other questions, comments from the planning commission?
So, and just for captions, is the intent that you're going to add whatever comments need to be added and then send this?
That's the intent. Do you feel, Jennifer, that you
I
have
can,
good
yeah, I
direction?
have them done in the next 2 days.
And let's thank Jennifer for all this work. Good
Yeah,
luck, Jennifer. And I know there were other people and other groups that preliminarily discussed this, so thank you all for that. Okay, so
Yeah.
the last topic on our agenda is zoning, continued discussion of potential zoning revisions. And I gotta tell you, never again will we have one planning commission 2 weeks after another.
I'll say.
Drop that way.
Especially since I didn't actually attend that
Just
one.
ask for a special meeting though in June.
There's not a lot of time to
Oh, okay. All right.
consolidate what we learned and prepare for the next one. So we don't have a whole lot prepared. But Chloe and I have discussed a couple of topics that we can sort of take some small bites on. At least get some direction that will allow Chloe to do some continued work. So I will turn it over to Chloe. Is this for me or are you gonna pass it on?
So, no, sorry, those are both for you.
Oh, so,
Because,
sorry.
so I didn't actually print them for everyone. I was thinking I would put especially the map up on the screen. But I did just email it to all of you, so those of you with computers, maybe you can get it up on the computer, and I think I have enough for
I have to check my email during this meeting.
Well, I didn't expect you to check the email during the meeting, but maybe you can check it now.
Obscure. Yeah.
There's 2 topics,
You're
hopefully
right, this is
both.
better.
Okay, so this one I have 1 copy of, and this one I have 2. So
Thank you.
each get that one. Only one of you gets the other one. 2 issues. One is way back from the comprehensive plan. I know Heidi worked on that a lot. I'm not sure who else here was really involved in the comprehensive planning process, but, okay, Todd, great. One of the issues that's mentioned in the comp plan as a recommendation is to look into child and adult daycare and also nursing facilities in the zoning code and make sure those are adequately addressed. And so there's one memo that you don't need to read through everything here, it just pulls out what's in your code already related to child and adult daycare. Well, there's nothing related to adult daycare at all. So there's a couple definitions, permitted uses. So 2 of the types of childcare are permitted in 5A and 5B. Family childcare homes are permitted in 3B, 3C, 4A, 4B. Childcare centers and group homes are permitted as conditional uses in 3B and C. In institutional buildings, 4A in any building. Is that where we should have these? Does this fit? There's a couple of performance standards that I think are fine, but you can see what they are. Parking requirement. So 2 questions. One is, do you think any changes need to be made related to childcare? And this is especially a question for those involved with the comprehensive planning process. I'm not clear on whether there was a specific issue related to the childcare standards that needed to be addressed. It just says, in the recommendations, basically it just says, look at child and adult daycare uses. I mean, there's certainly things you could change. Nothing jumps out at me as like a major problem. So that's question 1. And the other is that the municipalities planning code requires all municipalities to plan for every reasonable use. 20 years ago, no one had ever heard of an adult daycare center. Now that is something that is a use that we see and probably it should be included in some way. I put in a couple examples of definitions from other municipalities at the end there. So one strategy is in the middle, Upper Providence in Montco defines daycare center as adult or child daycare. They just don't really differentiate, they just generalize. So whatever kind of person you're caring for, it's the same sort of set of types of uses and standards. So that would be one fairly easy option, is to just amend the code to include any kind of not 24-hour caretaking, where it's drop-off caretaking for any type of person. Or you can have adult daycare as a separate use standards. And then same with nursing home, it really isn't addressed in your code. I didn't see anywhere that would easily fit. Kevin, feel free to chime in if you want to disagree, that's fine. That's not as likely of a use to come into Narberth, but still probably makes sense to allow it somewhere.
So before anyone comments, I am going to ask Kevin to share anything. Kevin, if you're listening, I'm going to talk for a minute. There you are, hi. What I'd like to find out, though, ultimately, from the, well, maybe we could start, Kevin, in terms of either of these issues, childcare or other kinds of like adult care, are there any issues you've been seeing or that occurred to you that you'd like to kind of make us aware of?
Nah, not for this topic. Nothing at all, honestly. We only have one daycare. It's on Montgomery Avenue, but it's really limited.
Kids Corner closed.
Family childcare.
It's not on Montgomery.
No, that's another one. And doesn't the church have one too?
Yeah.
Presbyterian
Yes.
Church?
Yes.
So, well, Kevin, we can think of more childcare places than that, like at one or two churches, right?
Yeah, the
Presbyterian
Baptist Church and the, what is it, Eaton?
Presbyterian on Grayling and.
And the one on Narberth.
One in Narberth and
And
Woodline.
Woodline.
Yeah.
Does it operate the same way?
Oh,
If it's
yeah.
operating out of the
Kids
church,
Club.
is that an accessory use? Or is, like, does it matter whether it's the primary use or not?
That's a question for Kevin. Kevin, you know those childcares in the churches?
Yeah, I think the one at the Presbyterian Church, they're kind of like two separate uses. They're both kind of primary uses. At the Presbyterian Church, that's pretty significant. I think there's like over 100 kids there. But I guess what I'm getting to is these questions don't come up often, and all these pre-existing uses, don't need to get a use or zoning permit. So we don't need to reclassify these. Like, we don't need to fit them in the box. They're either, non-conforming or they're already existing. I don't get questions for proposed childcare centers or proposed family childcare homes, things like that.
Well, I guess like my question would be, if these are like existing uses and we have them today, but our code is not providing for them in some way, shape, or form, isn't that an issue? I mean, that seems to me to be, if it's something that we think is a positive good to have, and we have it, and yet our policies, and yet in the universe where we didn't have it, our policies would not provide clear guidance on that. That to me seems to be a problem.
It's always helpful to have more uses because people come in and ask for, they're called like legalization letters or confirmation of use letters, where they're trying to get the borough to state on record like what the legal use of the property is. And we don't have any of these use permits. I will say that about 2 years ago, when Matt West was still with the borough, we plan on doing what's called like a zoning or use registration program, where we would actually go around and identify the specific uses for every property in the borough, in which case this would be helpful to have more uses because we'd have these more specific classifications. Which is what, kind of getting back to what I was talking about last week or 2 weeks ago with the stores. We'd probably have 100 stores in Narberth, and I'm not sure that's where we want to be with that.
Well, I guess that I think there's also define certain things, but if there are certain things that literally we don't have a definition for, that would seem to be an issue.
Like adult care or, right?
Right, I mean, like to the extent that we as a community, like, to the extent that the goal of we as a community, it would be that you could be born, live, and die in Narberth and never have to go anywhere else, right? Obviously, a little bit of an absurd, like, example, but like, if that's kind of like the vision, that you can do all your business here, then, yeah, it would make sense to me that we should be providing guidance for those uses that are gonna take you from the cradle, not to the grave, I don't wanna be too morbid about it, but to like, you know, your social needs from childhood through.
Happy college signing day season.
Sorry.
So let's stick with childcare for a second. So Kevin, am I right? Is it the case that there are, for example, some larger childcare facilities, the ones associated with the churches, for which there actually isn't kind of a classification in the code? So if someone would, they're okay because they're grandfathered in, but if someone wanted to create one of that scale or another church or something, that would not be possible?
Yeah, that's right. I'd probably just send them to the zoning hearing board for not having a use as defined in one of the tables.
A child care center is a facility which is licensed to provide care for 7 or more children at any one time. So I think there is a definition that would apply to a larger child care center.
Right.
They're only permitted in certain districts and they have to be in certain types of buildings. So whether, someone wanted to open something new would fit those requirements, I don't know, but there is a use for a child care center, I think.
Okay. So really, based on what Kevin said, there's a use for large child care centers. There's not really any issues with them. So I think we can answer the first question. Do any adjustments need to be made in regulations for child care? The answer seems to be no. Okay, so then the second question is, should we add adult daycare as a use, nursing care as a use? Michael's made a case for that reinforces, I think, what the plan calls for. I think right now it's just sort of a binary question, and then if there's support for the idea of having adult daycare and nursing care, and really we're sort of required to allow for any use in the borough, but the next question would be, are there particular areas of the borough that you think they should be, are most appropriate in, or are there any particular conditions or requirements? And then with that kind of guidance, we can turn it back to Chloe. And what I'm trying to get to is a point where there's enough of a direction, and give it back to Chloe. You got your hand up first.
Yeah, I just think I can maybe help structure this in an efficient way. I think with adult care, you have at one end of the spectrum independent living. We have, senior citizens living independently, but maybe have their lunch delivered or their dinner delivered or something like that. Like very minimal intervention from a professional. On the other end of the spectrum, you have like assisted living, which is, has medical necessities. There are ventilation requirements. There are code requirements for, fire. They need 2 hours to get out the door. Something like that. Like there are codes and there are, just the requirements are much more demanding. I'm thinking to myself, an assisted living center with a medical facility, where would that go? Like what property exists in Narberth that could accommodate those kinds of facilities?
That becomes a healthcare facility, doesn't it?
Sort of. I think they're getting more creative with it nowadays, but.
I think you cross a line when you go into assisted living. I have not yet myself crossed that line, but I can see it on the horizon.
And Jim, we're going to keep moving the goalposts on you.
All right, good. I'm glad you did that. But I think you cross the line into healthcare, and then all hell breaks loose. Because you're dealing with a whole different set of rules.
Well, let me just clarify one thing, which is that, there's, in terms of residential facilities, there's the whole range, but there's also now facilities that are pretty common where someone with, for example, dementia may live with family members, but when those family members go to work and school, those folks get dropped off at a place where they'll be safe all day and get picked up, just like daycare, like that, except it's for generally people with dementia or some kind of medical need that they can't manage on their own, but they still can live with their family.
So is
there's
that
that, adult daycare, usually called, and then there's also nursing care or other kinds of adult residential care. Those are two different things.
And to answer your question, wouldn't the, really the only, the first obvious place would be along larger lots along Montgomery Avenue. If someone, I mean, we're not like telling people to do it and do it where, but we're just saying like, if you want to do it, here's the place to go. I mean, wouldn't that be logical on Montgomery Avenue?
Well, I mean, I think and I may be way off based on this, but for instance, like, I think that the approach that was taken with family childcare homes seems like a good approach to me, which is that it's pretty, and I might even say like, maybe you want the performance standards to be a little bit more defined, more than just kind of like get a, valid certificate, but the family child cares are allowed pretty broadly. There's a limit to like the number of people that can be in those, but it provides kind of like, you probably aren't gonna get a ton of them, so I think like providing kind of like a larger space in which those can locate, because I really kind of doubt that adult daycare, they're gonna be blasting metal music in the middle of a neighborhood or something along those lines. But to the extent that there are any concerns about noise or lighting or anything like that, like structuring a performance standard that accounts for any potential kind of nuisances, and then that way what you've done is like you've provided the opportunity for it. Maybe we get none, or maybe the person that's looking to open up an adult daycare for 5 people just happens to have a spot come on some line, and now they're not kind of like narrowed down and where they can look in Narberth and provided more opportunities for it, and you've taken care of your performance standards and any sort of potential nuisances that could occur. And it seems like we already have something of a approach similar to this with family child care facilities. And so that seems to me, it makes sense as a organizing principle for this type of thing.
Yeah, I would say I agree as far as locations for the adult daycare perspective. Like if it fits in a childcare that is already in the zoned locations, it fits in with the same constraints as the family childcare. The licensing for these types of facilities is going to dictate whether or not it actually works in a single family home. But as far as placement, as these types of services expand over time because they are rapidly changing, it gives room in the code preemptively for somebody who is able to adjust. As far as nursing care, which I think is a different classification, I mean, hypothetically, any apartment building in Narberth could be modified to be nursing care. Because you'd just be modifying access and room sizes. But to me, it's two different questions. One is the daytime drop off and pick up no more than 16 hours, and the other is full-time care. And the reality is that it's senior housing is one of the fastest growing residential uses in an aging population. And so the reality is that apartment buildings are being modified to be able to be that more assisted living, like step down
And they're different
facilities.
occupancy classes.
Yeah. So if an apartment building works for having a multifamily type living scenario, as the zoning code is written, why wouldn't that be sufficient for also allowing for multifamily, but in a nursing care facility? Especially because nursing care facility is going to have its own list of requirements as far as ambulance approaches and things like that, that may dictate.
I think that's the key. These are so highly regulated that that's really going to be the driver.
So a lot of these places may not even fall under it by the time someone does the analysis of what the regulatory standards are, but from a zoning perspective, it could go there.
Well, and also conditional use buildings, like civic buildings that are converted.
Right. And all apartments are
Yeah.
conditional use buildings too, if they're new.
Right.
But it should
know-
be allowed, yeah.
So the gist of this sounds to me like, look at adult daycare the way that we look at childcare in terms of how it integrates into neighborhoods with certain kinds of standards, and look at more intensive things like nursing, convalescent, nursing care facilities as the same philosophy, but thinking about how they might fit into places where we allow apartments or mixed-use buildings, for that matter. Again, with a, it's like a use overlay in a way, right? So you allow, wherever that building is allowed, that building type, with certain standards that are related to that use.
Right.
Can I ask a quick question? There may be some reason for this, or maybe there wasn't a reason, it just kind of was, but the family child care homes, it looks like they're allowed basically anywhere except for downtown Montgomery Avenue. You're not gonna have those things there anyway. But it's not allowed in 3A, which seems odd to me because 3B, 3C, it just like visually, if I'm sitting there thinking about like the areas of town, and then we have 3A, which is large lot, larger structures, and seems a lot of space for kids to be running around outside during the day, and that's the area where we've said, no, not here. And so that just seems odd.
No business.
Sure, but there's no business really in 3B. 3A, you can have your no impact, businesses, but I don't like, so there's an interesting question there for kind of, I guess, like a different discussion about businesses, but this seems to be kind of a business kind of.
Impact, I think.
Huh?
You said no impact. It's a question about impact.
But if it's a question about impact, couldn't we regulate that via performance standards?
Maybe.
And if it's something where, if the concern is about impact, right, we could, Dave already said it, like these are very highly regulated uses, but to the extent that they're not regulated on the impact, we could have some sort of like an impact permit. You go and you pull it by right, or whatever it is, and then it can get revoked from you if you have, a free strike on your impacts, whatever it is. You're blasting music in the middle of the night. Now you don't have a allowable use at that point, right? So I think that there's ways to, if the concern is impact, I think there's ways to address that.
I think that, I'll just treat me as a reporter here.
No comment.
When we discussed it years back, I seem to recall the impact we were most concerned about was traffic moving through the neighborhood. And a lot of the 3A district is streets that aren't through streets. Your street, for example. So if there's a daycare at the end of the street, cars will be going back and forth at the end of the cul-de-sac and back, as opposed to streets. And that tends to be where 3A is, as opposed to streets. 3B tends to be where the grid is.
Mr. Softy is more than enough for that.
Yeah, Mr. Softy. And
That makes sense to me,
so that
except,
was, I'm just saying that's like kind of the context for it. It was mostly traffic impacts, like we.
well, it makes sense to me, except for family childcare is 4, 5, 6 children. If we assume that those are all individual children that are going to be traveling in and out, right? That's 6 cars a day. And I don't know that that is going to create traffic apocalypse. So that would be my response if you were a reporter.
Standard, I can think a lot of things.
I'll write it in traffic apocalypse.
Not even the traffic apocalypse predicted for the 405 occurred, when they closed it for a weekend. Yeah, that didn't even turn into an apocalypse, so. By that standard, we could accommodate almost anything. Let's close Montgomery Avenue. So let me tell you, I have this secret goal of kind of like trying to finish at 9 today, so maybe we could wrap this up and then Chloe can introduce the topic we'll talk about next time we talk about this, but we won't actually talk about it. What's people's temperature on this idea of extending these types of childcare uses into the 3A district? I think Michael's made I've tried to relate what I think our discussions were years ago, but I think Michael's made some other arguments about this. So what is people's temperature on this?
So is that the only district where they're not allowed?
Correct. Family childcare homes, which is only 4, 5, or 6 children, are permitted only in 3B, 3C, 4A, and 4B, and only in a detached house. So they're also not permitted in 5A and 5B, and they're not permitted in a different type of unit.
It's the red. It's the large lot cul-de-sac.
Which, I mean,
I think they should be extended into 3A. I mean, my goodness.
there's a little irony that the like large
Yeah.
lots aren't allowed to have.
Yeah, what if
childcare.
they have 10 kids?
But
Any other reactions? I'll ask for public comment on this since we have a member of the public here. Comment?
I
Okay.
like how you look behind you.
Well, it sounds like, Chloe, there's a sentiment that we should consider this. You might maybe look at this in the context of performance requirements. You know, are there things that either are in our code now or could be in our code? So I think that is kind of direction for you.
Great.
Is there
And I
anything
heard-
else you would need? Oh, you know what, before we do wrap this up, I'm sorry, Kevin. I should, and then, you're not in the room, so I forget to ask you some, do you have any thoughts about this, Kevin?
Not really, honestly. I didn't read either of these 3 block lots in the adult daycare until about 15 minutes before the meeting. So these didn't come up to me. I didn't think they were important enough, but if they're easy enough to slide in, it's easy enough for me.
It's not an issue. The child care and adult care, I wanted to bring up because it was in the comp plan as a recommendation. So it seems like at least we're trying to deal with that.
And we're methodically trying to work through that comp plan, so I
Right,
appreciate
then
that.
we can check it
That's
out.
actually how, as someone else said earlier today, that's how planning works. It's a good comp plan. So Chloe, hopefully you have good direction that you could use to draft up how we might approach that. Before we adjourn, though, would you mind at least putting on the table the idea you'd like to talk about next, or the issue you'd like to talk about next? And did you pass out that map to everyone?
I did, yes, it's in the second,
Yeah.
you got it too in your email.
Yes, I just want
Oh,
to make
you
sure.
had it from earlier, but I
I want to
also.
make sure everyone else has it.
Yes, I
So
also
can you
shared
explain
with
what we've got
everyone
and
the
what you'd like to talk about here?
Yes, so this came up since I've been working with Narberth, and it had come up earlier also. We added to the code a definition of 3 block lots, which wasn't, we added to the SALDO, it was enough SALDO work. 3 block lots, which wasn't clearly defined, meaning, I put in the memo, the definition, as it's currently written in the code. It's a lot that has frontage on 2 streets, or a corner lot that has frontage on 3 streets. A lot other than a corner lot which has frontage on 2 or more streets, or a corner lot which has frontage on 3 or more streets. So this map identifies corner lots, 3 block lots, and so everything that's red has frontage on 2 streets, and then tan has frontage on 3 streets, and the highlighted blue have frontage on 2 streets but are not corner lots. So just sort of take a look at these sort of special cases.
It's an inventory of quirky lots.
An inventory, I mean, it includes all the corner lots, so those aren't as quirky. And there are a few quirky lots that aren't included here, but specifically the issue that I'm raising here is these 3 block lots. There are certain regulations related to rear yards and the 3rd lot layer that it doesn't appear have been really thought through in the context of 3 block lots. So certain things are allowed in the 3rd lot layer, setbacks in the 3rd rear yard setbacks. These would all apply to these 3 block lots as they are right now, with the small exception that those fences, it is mentioned that fences in the 2nd or 3rd lot layer that abut the street are limited to 3 feet, which is actually lower than the limit in the 1st lot layer, which is 4 feet. So it's not a lot of issues. Just wanted to mention that in case there's things it should be dealt with. Also, there's the whole concept of frontage and what your lot looks like that isn't addressed at all for 3 block lots. I don't know if you wanted to try to add something about that or think about that a little bit. Just wanted to raise that issue.
Can I ask a logistical question?
Sure.
So what's the standard for defining for these types of things, where the frontage is?
Yeah, so that is addressed in the code. Someone else might have it there. That Kevin has it at his fingertips faster than I do. How do you decide what's the primary frontage?
If it's a corner lot?
On any of these lots? How do you determine what's the primary frontage? I'll look, and just so I can answer the question accurately rather than. And then, Kevin, if you want to chime in, please don't hold back.
Chloe, sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I can only really hear Todd.
Okay, on any lot that has more than one street frontage, how do you determine what's the primary frontage?
Depends on what corner it is. Sometimes, like if it's Montgomery Avenue, the code requires Montgomery Avenue to be the primary. Same thing in that 4A cutout for like Windsor. Windsor has to be the primary frontage, but generally it's whatever more buildings on that block face you pick as the primary, and then the zoning officer or council has discretion to call it the other one if they desire.
So basically you get to pick most of the time.
I think it says zoning or council, and I think it's more appropriate the council picks it. At least that's how it's worked.
Yeah, okay.
It's not just though that they get to pick, it's that the notion is that unless there's some reason for things to be different, it's also where more frontages exist, right? That has more frontages, you don't pick on like a little side street that has no frontages. Unless there's some reason which allows the zoning officer or council to.
Would these ones I guess the ones that are like the 3 blocks, right? The ones that are outlined in blue?
Yeah.
Those are on blocks where the other lots have been subdivided, it looks like.
Right.
And those ones have not, they're unsubdivided. Do we know whether those would meet the standards for subdivision in a similar context to what already exists on the other portions of those blocks, or would those not meet whatever our existing current standards are? Like if they had been subdivided prior to whatever our current dimensional standards are, and that may be a level of specificity that we haven't gotten into. I just wasn't sure if you looked at that.
I didn't look at all of them. I know that some of them are able to be subdivided under the current code, but I'm not sure if all of them are.
It has to do with lot size.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I just wasn't sure if it was like maybe, because some of them look like they're pretty big lots, so I wasn't sure if maybe they would meet it, but maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because then, for some of those, maybe that's just, they meet the built environment of the rest of the block.
Kevin, how do you deal with these lots that have frontage on 3 streets?
Well, I mean, really, I don't think we can properly review them right now, honestly. I mean, if this were new construction anyway, which is the case with Price House.
It seems like a more difficult issue in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're looking for is some better direction how to handle these
Yeah,
lots.
and I can think about this more and try to talk to Kevin before next time, but that's broadly speaking the issue. And I know there's a lot of people here who care a lot about what the frontage looks like, and thinking about, lots with 3 frontages or these 3 block lots, what do you want there? Yeah, we can talk about that in the future.
I would just note mapping wise, parcels fronting 2 streets, 3 blocks. A lot of Narbrook Park should be included there.
Yeah.
As well as, I believe here, there's a block of Grayling.
Between Narbrook Park and Conway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, just note of interest, when I was a kid, and I remember going down Conway, and there were these big fences, and it wasn't until years later that I realized that was actually, those were the Narborough Park.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right, in the Grayling Avenue houses too.
Yeah, so there's a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are the three, that and Marion are the three places where I always think of there being these three lots.
But I would personally, with this map, I wouldn't show the common parks and things in that
Yeah.
tone, because they're not certain parcels.
Right, like the Showmax, for example.
Right, so,
Yeah.
so there's some house lots that should be added and some parks could be deleted.
Okay, we'll work on that for next time.
Okay, so, next time we will tackle this in more depth. Next time we talk about this, which may be later.
Yeah, that's okay. Think about it in the meantime. Yeah,
Okay,
let it simmer. Talk about it in the future.
Okay.
okay. Is, there any other business, Jim? You had mentioned, that you'd like to bring up the business of, earlier tonight.
Reactivating,
Yes,
I think we've covered it.
okay, all right. If there's no other business, then, I'm sorry, any public comment? I don't know who's on Zoom, if there is anyone on Zoom anymore. We want to have the public here. Is there any public comment on any other matters? Okay, so we'll close public comment. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion approved unanimous. This is, none of us have the muscle memory of having a 2-hour meeting anymore.
I know.
Thank you all.
Hour of my life.